Snow fell silently over Boston's Beacon Hill, blanketing the cobblestones in white, but inside the sterling gallery, the air was thick with the heat of champagne and silent judgment. Elara Brooks stood near a pillar of gray marble, her navy dress blending into the shadows, a deliberate choice for a woman who had spent her career being the unseen hand behind masterpieces. She swirled the sparkling water in her glass, watching the city's elite posture and preen under the crystal chandeliers. She was used to being a ghost in rooms like this. As an art restorer, her job was to heal history without leaving a trace of herself. But tonight felt different. The invitation had arrived without a sender, and curiosity had pulled her from the safety of her quiet apartment into this den of wolves. Just 10 minutes ago, a security guard had stepped directly into her path, his eyes scanning her simple clutch and dark skin with a suspicion he didn't show the women in diamonds walking right behind her. He had only stepped aside when she produced the heavy, cream-colored invitation, offering a grunt instead of an apology. It was a small cut, a familiar microaggression that she tucked away with a practiced sigh. Well, if it isn't the help. The voice was loud, cutting through the low hum of jazz like shattered glass. Elara stiffened but didn't turn immediately. She knew that baritone. She had once thought it sounded like safety. Now she knew it was just the sound of an ego needing to be fed. Richard Whittaker approached, a champagne flute in one hand and his new wife Sienna on the other arm. Sienna was a vision of excess, dripping in diamonds that caught the gallery lights a little too aggressively. "Richard," Elara said, her tone evened, turning to face them. "Good evening. I didn't know they gave +1s to the service staff," Richard laughed, glancing around at his circle of friends to ensure they were listening. The group chuckled politely, their eyes darting between Elara's dignified stillness and Richard's flushed face. "I'm joking, of course. Elara here is a genius at cleaning up other people's messes. Isn't that right, darling?" "Actually, I'm here to see the Dutch Masters exhibit," Elara replied, lifting her chin slightly. "The lightwork is exceptional." Richard stepped closer, his smile tightening into a sneer that didn't reach his eyes. He lowered his voice, but it was still loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "Always trying to sound like you belong, Elara. You really haven't changed. You were always a diversity hire in my world. Lucky to be in the room, lucky to be seen. You should thank me for making you relevant while it lasted." The insult hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Sienna giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Oh, Richard, behave. She looks so lonely." Elara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame, but from a burning righteous anger she refused to unleash. She would not give him the satisfaction of a scene. She was a professional. She was a woman of substance. She took a breath to excuse herself, to retreat into the cold night where the air was clean. But before she could move, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The chatter near the entrance died down instantly, a wave of silence rolling toward them. A man had stepped out of the periphery, a man whose presence commanded the kind of attention money couldn't buy. Julian Thorne, the elusive billionaire patron of the arts, known more for his reclusiveness than his appearances. He walked with a predator's grace, straight through the parting crowd. He didn't look at the donors or the critics. His dark eyes were locked on Richard with an intensity that made the other man take an involuntary step back. Julian stopped beside Elara, his tall frame creating a shield between her and the ridicule. He didn't speak to the crowd. He reached out and took Elara's hand, his fingers lacing through hers with a familiarity that shocked the breath out of her. He turned his gaze to Richard, cold and sharp as a diamond cutter. "Careful, Richard," Julian said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You are speaking to my fiancée." The gallery froze as if trapped in amber. Julian didn't look at the crowd. He only looked at Elara, his grip warm and steady against the cold shock of the moment. What a breathtaking moment. Julian just silenced the entire room with 5 words, and the real story is just beginning. If you are rooting for Elara to reclaim her dignity against those who mocked her, please comment the number 8 below to let us know you're watching and standing with her. And if you haven't already, please join our growing family by subscribing to Black King and hitting that notification bell. Your support empowers us to keep bringing you stories of resilience, triumph, and truth. Now, let's find out, is this engagement real, or is it just a rescue? Let's continue. The morning headlines were louder than the blizzard outside. Billionaire's mystery bride. Who is Elara Brooks? Elara stared at the tablet Elias Ward had placed gently on the mahogany table, the bold letters mocking the quiet elegance of the room. Outside the towering windows of Stone Manor, snow swirled in a chaotic dance, erasing the world. But inside, the library was a fortress of warmth. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth, smelling of pine and old money. Yet Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She looked down at her hand. The phantom warmth of Julian's grip from the night before still lingered, a stark contrast to the cold reality of her current position. She wasn't a fiancée. She was a headline. A prop. "I expect you're angry," a voice came from the doorway. Julian Thorne entered, not with the predatory stride of the gallery, but with a quiet, almost weary cadence. He wore a charcoal cashmere sweater that softened his imposing frame, holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He set one down near her, keeping a respectful distance. "Angry doesn't quite cover it," Elara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She stood, smoothing the fabric of her wool trousers. "I am not a prop for your public theater, Mr. Thorne. You used me to make a point to Richard, and now the entire city is dissecting my life." "I used the only shield I knew would stop him," Julian corrected gently. "Richard feeds on weakness. I had to present him with a wall he couldn't breach." "I apologize for the method, Elara, truly, but I do not apologize for the intent." Elara studied him. There was no arrogance in his eyes, only a strange, guarded desperation. "So what now?" "I issue a denial. You look the fool, and the circus continues." "No," Julian said. He walked toward a large easel standing in the corner, draped in heavy velvet. "We let them talk. Because while they are distracted by the romance, you can do the work I actually brought you here for." Elara blinked. "Work? I didn't just step in because I hate bullies, though I do," Julian admitted. "I stepped in because you are the best restorer on the East Coast, and I have something that requires more than just technique. It requires a soul." He pulled the velvet cloth away. Dust motes danced in the shaft of winter light that hit the canvas. Elara gasped softly. It was a portrait, clearly Baroque in style, dating back centuries. But the subject wasn't a Dutch merchant or a pale aristocrat. It was a black woman with eyes like storms and a regal bearing, wearing a lace collar painted with exquisite detail. But the damage was catastrophic. A jagged tear ran through the background, and water stains bloomed across the lower quadrant like bruises. "My mother," Julian said softly, the admission hanging in the air. "Painted by her father, hidden for decades. Every other expert I brought in wanted to correct her. They wanted to lighten the skin tone, claim it was a stylistic error of lighting. They wanted to make her palatable for the market." He turned to Elara, his gaze intense. "I need someone who sees the truth. I need you." Elara felt the anger drain out of her, replaced by a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. She saw the history of erasure in those water stains, the fight for existence in the set of the woman's jaw. This wasn't just a job, it was a rescue mission. Elara stepped closer to the canvas, seeing not just the damage, but the dignity surviving beneath the cracks. She knew she couldn't walk away from this woman. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil was a comfort Elara preferred over perfume. In the quiet studio, she was the master of time. For 3 days, Stone Manor had become her entire world, a sanctuary of snow and silence where the only clock that mattered was the one ticking inside the canvas. Outside, the Boston winter was relentless, burying the driveway in drifts of white, but inside the high-ceilinged sunroom converted into a studio, the air was warm and smelled faintly of the hot cider Julian kept on the sideboard. Elara worked with the precision of a surgeon. Under the magnifying lamp, her cotton swab moved in tiny, hypnotic circles, lifting away decades of yellowed varnish. Every time her hand cramped, she thought of Richard's voice at the gallery. "She cleans up other people's messes." The insult didn't sting anymore. It fueled her. She wasn't cleaning a mess. She was excavating a truth he would never understand. "You have the hands of a pianist," Julian observed. He was sitting in a wingback chair by the fire, a leather-bound book resting on his knee. He had spent hours there each day, not hovering, just witnessing. It was a level of respect Elara wasn't used to. Chemistry and patience, Elara corrected without looking up, though a small smile touched her lips. The varnish is oxidized. If I rush, I burn the paint. If I hesitate, I leave a stain. It's a negotiation with the past. Julian stood and walked over, placing the book on the table beside her tools. My mother wrote about that negotiation, he said softly. He opened the journal to a page marked with a blue ribbon. His finger traced the faded ink. Read this. Elara wiped her hands and leaned in. The handwriting was elegant but hurried. They praise the lace on my collar but look past the face it frames. To them, I am a curiosity, a shadow in the corner of the parlor. I paint myself not to be seen by them, but to prove to myself that I exist. Elara felt a lump form in her throat. The words reached across time, gripping her heart. It was the same feeling she had at the gallery, the feeling of being decorative but dismissed. She felt invisible, Elara whispered. She was, Julian replied, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Until now. That's why I couldn't let just anyone touch this. You understand her silence, Elara? The intimacy of the moment was thick, heavier than the snow piling up against the glass. Across the city, however, the silence was being broken. In a penthouse overlooking the frozen Charles River, Richard paced the floor, phone pressed to his ear. The narrative of the billionaire's mystery bride was dominating the social columns, and his ego couldn't tolerate the eclipse. I don't care how you do it, Cade, Richard snapped into the receiver. Dig up the internship in Florence. Find a disgruntled professor. Spin the narrative. She's a fraud, a diversity hire who got lucky. If we can't break the engagement, we break her reputation. He listened for a moment, then smiled, a cold, sharp expression. Do it. Post it on Christmas morning. Let's see how festive they feel then. Back at the manor, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, Elara returned to the easel. She dipped a fresh swab into the solvent mixture she had carefully balanced. With a breath held tight in her chest, she touched the canvas near the subject's eyes. The darkened film dissolved, and for the first time in 50 years, the light caught the iris. The woman in the painting looked back. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and fierce, identical to the man standing beside Elara. She has your eyes, Elara said, turning to Julian. He was closer than she realized. He looked from the painting to Elara, and in that shared gaze, the professional distance evaporated, replaced by a profound, terrifying connection. No, Julian said softly. She has yours. The air between them hummed, charged with a possibility that frightened and thrilled her. But the spell was shattered by a harsh vibration against the wood. Her phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with a message from an unknown number. I know you're a fraud, and soon everyone else will too. The piece of the studio has just been shattered. Someone is watching Elara, and they want to destroy her. If you are hooked by this mystery and want to see Elara stand her ground, please comment the number 8 below. It lets me know you are right here with us in this suspense. And if you haven't joined our community yet, I highly recommend you subscribe to Black King and hit that notification bell right now. Your support is the fuel that allows us to keep creating these powerful, inspiring stories for you. Now, let's find out who is behind that text. Let's continue. Christmas morning usually brought peace to Beacon Hill, but for Elara, it brought a headline that felt like a physical blow. The diversity fraud. How Elara Brooks faked her way to the top. The words glared from the screen of her phone, toxic and neon bright against the gray morning light filtering into the guest bedroom. Downstairs, the smell of cinnamon pancakes and roasting coffee drifted up from the kitchen, a cruel promise of a holiday that was now dead on arrival. Elara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she scrolled. It was a masterpiece of distortion. Cade Voss had taken Grains of Truth, a summer program in Florence, a difficult restoration project from her early 20s, and twisted them into a narrative of incompetence. The article claimed she had used identity politics to bully her way into contracts she wasn't qualified for, citing anonymous sources who called her a danger to historical artifacts. The comments section was worse. It was a digital mob baying for blood. She stood up abruptly, the room spinning. The text message from last night hadn't been a prank. It was a warning shot. She grabbed her suitcase from the closet. She couldn't stay. She wouldn't let the mud Richard was flinging splash onto Julian's family legacy. The Thornes were old money, pristine and private. Being associated with a fraud would tarnish the very history she was trying to save. She moved on autopilot, throwing clothes into the bag. The wool trousers, the navy dress, armor that had failed her. She zipped the bag shut with a harsh sound that echoed in the silence. She would leave a note. It was cowardly, but she couldn't face him. She couldn't bear to see the look of doubt that might now be in his eyes. Elara dragged the suitcase to the bedroom door, but when she opened it, Julian was already there. He wasn't dressed for breakfast. He was still in his shirt sleeves, holding a sheaf of papers, his face thunderous. He looked at the suitcase, then at her tear-stained face, and his expression shifted from anger to a fierce, protective resolve. "You're running," he stated, blocking the hallway. "I'm saving you," Elara choked out, gripping the handle of her luggage until her knuckles turned white. "Read the comments, Julian. They're calling me a diversity hire, a liar. If I stay, this filth sticks to you. To the museum. To your mother's painting." "I have read them," Julian said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "And I have also read this." He held out a worn, leather-bound notebook, not the diary she had seen before, but a different one. A technical ledger. He opened it to a marked page and shoved it gently toward her. "Boss claims your choice of solvent for the background was amateur," Julian said, his voice hard with suppressed rage. "He claims you're stripping away the original patina. Look at the date on that entry. My mother didn't just paint that portrait. She logged her chemistry." Elara looked down. There, in the same elegant script, was the formula for the glaze. A mixture of dammer and mastic applied thinly. "It will yellow too quickly. If it must be cleaned, use the ethanol blend, not the acetone." It was the exact blend Elara had chosen. The exact technique the article mocked as destructive was the one the artist herself had prescribed. "You aren't guessing, Elara," Julian said, his voice dropping to a rumble. "You are listening to her when everyone else is just shouting. This isn't evidence of fraud. It's proof of brilliance." "But the world doesn't care about the truth," Elara whispered. "They care about the scandal." "Then we make them care," Julian said. He took the suitcase from her hand and set it down firmly. "We don't run from lies. We dismantle them." Elara looked from the faded handwriting to Julian's fierce eyes and realized they weren't just defending a painting anymore. They were going to war for the truth. Revenge is loud, but justice is quiet. In the high-rise office of Julian's legal team, the silence was terrifyingly efficient. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston was being lashed by gray sleet, but inside, the temperature was controlled and clinical. Mr. Stone, Julian's lead attorney, placed a single heavy folder on the glass table. It landed with a thud that sounded like a coffin closing. "We have everything, Mr. Thorne," Stone said, adjusting his spectacles. "The defamation suit against Cade Voss and the newspaper is ready to file. But the evidence regarding Mr. Whitaker is particularly robust." Elara sat beside Julian, her back straight. She watched as Stone fanned out the exhibits. Exhibit A, the technical journal proving her restoration methods were historically accurate. Exhibit B, a forensic analysis of the article's timestamps, linking the anonymous source directly to a burner phone purchased by Richard's assistant. It wasn't just a lie, it was a conspiracy. "File it," Julian said, his voice devoid of emotion. "And execute the second phase." Across town, in a penthouse that smelled of expensive cologne and hubris, Richard Whitaker was pouring a second glass of champagne. Sienna was scrolling through her phone, giggling at the memes mocking Elara. "You did it, Richard," she cooed. "She's finished. No one will hire her to paint a fence, let alone a masterpiece." "I told her," Richard said, swirling his drink. "She was out of her depth. I just helped her find the exit." The doorbell rang. Richard frowned, setting his glass down. He wasn't expecting guests. When he opened the door, a man in a damp raincoat handed him a thick envelope. "Richard Whitaker? You've been served." Richard scoffed, tearing it open. "A lawsuit? Please. I'll drag this out for ye." His voice died in his throat. It wasn't just a defamation suit. It was a notification from the SEC. His assets had been frozen pending an investigation into insider trading, irregularities flagged by an audit Julian Thorne had quietly triggered days ago. The champagne turned to vinegar in his stomach. Back at Stone Manor, the storm had passed, leaving a pristine silence. Elara stood before the easel in the library. The restoration was complete. She dipped her brush into the final varnish, a clear, protective coat that would seal the paint for another century. With a steady hand, she applied the last stroke. The face of Julian's mother, Grace, shone with a luminance that was breathtaking. The water stains were gone. The tear was invisible. She was whole. The phone on the side table rang, jarring the peace. It was Julian's private line, but he was in the other room. Elara saw the caller ID, Richard. She hesitated, then picked it up. Julian. Richard's voice was high, stripped of its usual arrogance. Look, we need to talk. You can't freeze my accounts. I can make the article go away. I can make Voss retract it. Let's settle this man-to-man. Elara let the silence stretch, listening to his panicked breathing. Julian isn't available, Richard, she said softly. Elara? He sounded horrified. Put him on. Now. No, she replied, her voice calm, carrying the weight of the woman in the painting behind her. You wanted to question my competence, Richard. You wanted a public spectacle. Now you have the attention you craved. We don't want a settlement. We want the truth. You can't do this, he shouted. See you in court, Richard. Or at the museum. Your choice. She hung up the phone and turned to the easel. The woman in the painting seemed to smile, as if she knew the storm had finally passed. The Museum of Fine Arts had not seen a crowd this large in a decade, but tonight, they weren't here for the champagne. They were here for the truth. It was New Year's Eve, and the rotunda was ablaze with golden light. Elara stood at the edge of the velvet ropes, smoothing the silk of her gold gown. It was a bold choice, a deliberate departure from the invisible navy she had worn at the gallery. Tonight, she wasn't blending in. She was the centerpiece. Ready? Julian asked, offering his arm. He looked dashing in a tuxedo, but his eyes were focused solely on her, holding that same steady admiration he had shown in the quiet of the studio. Ready, Elara breathed. They walked onto the stage together, but Julian stepped back, leaving the podium entirely to her. A hush fell over the room, not the awkward silence of the gallery, but a silence of reverence. Behind her, the veil dropped, revealing the portrait of Grace Thorne. The crowd gasped. The painting was no longer a damaged relic. It was a window into a soul, radiant and commanding. Beside it, encased in glass, sat the technical journal, open to the page that proved the chemistry of genius. Elara leaned into the microphone. For 50 years, this woman was dismissed as a footnote, she began, her voice ringing clear without a tremor. She was told her technique was wrong, her skin too dark for the aesthetic of the time. But history is not written by those who destroy, it is written by those who preserve. She looked out at the sea of faces. We do not fix art to hide the past. We fix it to force the future to see the truth. Thunderous applause erupted, shaking the glass walls. It was a standing ovation. In the back of the room, standing alone near the exit signs, was Richard. He looked smaller, his tuxedo ill-fitting, his face pale. No one was looking at him. No one was laughing at his jokes. He had been rendered irrelevant by the very woman he tried to erase. He turned and slipped out the door, disappearing into the cold night, unnoticed and unmourned. The reception that followed was a blur of congratulations, but this time, the praise was for Elara's skill, not her company. Critics who had doubted her now lined up to ask about her solvent ratios. The diversity hire narrative had been incinerated by the undeniable evidence of her excellence. As midnight approached, Julian guided her away from the noise, out onto the private balcony overlooking the snowy fens. The city lights twinkled like diamonds in the frost. The air was crisp, cleansing. You were magnificent, Julian said, resting his hands on the stone railing, turning to face her. You restored her dignity, Elara. You gave her back her name. We did it, Elara corrected, smiling. I couldn't have done it without the journal. Without you believing in the process. Julian reached into his pocket. He hesitated, his usual composure cracking just enough to show the man beneath. That night at the gallery, I told a lie to protect you. I called you my fiancé because I knew it was the only title that would make them stop and listen. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. But watching you these past weeks, seeing your brilliance, your fire, I realized I don't want to be your shield anymore. I want to be your partner. He knelt on one knee in the snow-dusted quiet. He opened a small velvet box to reveal a vintage ring, gold, set with a deep sapphire that matched the eyes of the woman in the painting. Elara Brooks, I don't offer you a rescue. I offer you a lifetime of being seen. Will you marry me? Elara looked at the ring, then at the man who saw her when she was invisible, and whispered a yes that belonged only to them.